had these slides ready about 2 months before today. And if you're in the business I am, usually in the truck while you're driving to the place, you're putting the slides together. So these slides are going to come up. They'll be about as much of a surprise to me now as they are to you. But they're going to make points. And so this is the disclaimer. I'll let you read it. And a picture of me. And so let's start with this. I have a question. How many people graduated high school? Everybody raise your hand, graduated high school. Keep your arms up if you remember what your graduation speech was about. Nobody. All right, so here's this one word I want you to go away with and remember. This is the one word from this week I'd like you to remember, and that's homeostasis. Right? So the first philosophy that we have is, I can't make that calf eat more and it's going to perform more. That calf has a level that's set genetically, physiologically, that it can perform at. And what I have to do is I have to be able to feed that calf, manage that calf, so that it can do what genetically it's programmed to do. So down in the bottom in the yellow, I have the animal determines what it can do. Nutrition and management, in large part, is going to determine what that animal will do. And so I'm going to make a big advertisement here in a minute that when we look through a lot of the diets that are put together for cattle, we overfeed those cattle for energy, and what's limiting is amino acid nutrition of those cattle. So they're going to have a drive. In other species, we've seen this in other species, they will have a drive for intake to get to where that limiting amino acid is, and then when they get there, then they've maximized their performance. But they've eaten too much to get there. That means their feed to gain is poorer than it should be, and that means cost of gain has just been more to you than what it needed to be. So, homeostasis. And true form, I do things backwards, so we're going from right to left here. So if you look at the diet in the gut, we give water, VFAs, which is the same thing as glucose or sugar, for ruminant, starch, fat, oil, minerals, vitamins, and protein, really the proteins and amino acids. So our goal is we want all those things in the diet, so that gets digested in the gut, that second block from the left, and that goes into maintenance, growth, milk production, reproduction, work, everything we expect that cow or that calf to do. If the diet doesn't give us what we need, then I can't make glycogen for the liver, or I'm pulling that glycogen out of the liver. If you're interested in meat quality and carcass value and carcass weight, glycogen's pretty important for that. If you look at muscle, if I have this cow and it's been a drought and I don't have a lot of groceries for that cow to eat, what happens to body weight when she begins to lactate? Goes down, right? She's having to pull amino acids off of muscle, off of her body to make the milk. Same thing for adipose. If she's short in energy, she has to use fat for energy, and in the bone we get calcium and phosphorus. So most people that's had cows, you know about milk fever. So homeostasis, all we're trying to do is put in that diet what that animal needs to either grow, make milk, make a new calf, or whatever our demand is for that animal. And the biggest thing we're doing, or the new bag of tricks we think we bring to the equation, is we're going to balance for amino acids relative to energy, and we're going to take less off of that animal. So how are we different? Currently, if you do diets, you're going to look at TDN, ME, NE, and most of us talk about what? Whenever we talk about diets for calves, either backgrounding calves or feedlot calves. NEG. We all compare our energy, right? First thing we're going to say is energy isn't a good equation for looking at energy in cattle. So we use a different thing we call effective energy. That's in the second block of words down there. The biggest difference between effective energy and NEG, or net energy, is the guy that came up with this. He said you can't have one number, i.e. you can't have NEG, and that NEG tells you the energy you need for both protein retention and lipid retention. So he broke those two apart and has a different way of looking at that. Crude protein, metabolizable protein, which for the most part is crude protein flowing to the small intestine. First thing that to go away with this is there is no such thing as a crude protein requirement. There's no such thing as a metabolizable protein requirement. No animal has a protein requirement. Every animal has an amino acid requirement. The pig and the poultry guys are about 3 or 4 decades ahead of us in that regard. RDP, the starch-degrading bacteria, need peptide, nitrogen, all the bacteria need ammonia in the rumen. We balance for those 2 things because we want to make as much microbial protein as possible. It's got a great amino acid composition for the calf that's growing or for the cow that's milking, and it's the cheapest thing we can feed that animal for the protein source. So we want to maximize the amount of protein. So if you look at diets we put together, we worry about this RDP, we worry about RDN, we worry about too much fermentable starch in the rumen, getting enough energy into that rumen so that we get this microbial made. Last thing then is absorbable amino acids. We could care less what the crude protein level of the diet is. We meet RDP, we meet RDN, we meet an amino acid requirement. You can't find a swine guy that can tell you what the protein level in his diet is. All they care about is lysine energy, and then the other amino acids relative to lysine. So we could care less what protein level in the diet is per se. We do care, though, about getting these amino acids in there. And those first 3 are the ones we worry most about with beef: arginine, lysine, and methionine. So maximizing energy efficiency. Left column of numbers there is a diet. And this was some real numbers that we had. So it's silage, corn, grass silage, orchard grass hay, distiller's grains, and then liquid. And that's the percentages as fed in the diet. The intake then, the middle column, is mostly data they would supply. So this producer, 27 pounds as fed, 15.9, 16 pounds of dry matter. Initial body weight's 450, final 900. So backgrounding yard average daily gain was 2.2 that they were getting, and their feed to gain was 7.2. When we look at that diet and we analyze it for that effective energy or energy efficiency, we go in and we say that really those calves only need to consume 20.8 pounds of feed to get the same growth and to meet maintenance and growth requirements that they had. So go to the right column. We look at an EE ratio or energy efficiency ratio, and I'll explode this a bit in a second. We come up with 1.3. Now, we make some assumptions about what composition and gain in these calves are going to be. Large frame calf is going to put more lean down than what a small frame or moderate frame calf is going to put down. So we look at that and we say that energy ratio was 1.3. Just by looking at that, we'd say that calf's eating 30% more feed than what it needs for the level for the body weight size, the maintenance cost, and the growth needs for that calf. RD ammonia ratio, 0.79, perfect. We want that between 0.7 and 1. The RDP peptide ratio, we want that over 1, 1.32, that's perfect. Arginine, lysine, and methionine, those numbers express the percent of those amino acids that we believe that calf had to work with based on its requirement. And so arginine's the most limiting, it's at 97%. So we look at that, we say, we've got a lot of efficiency. We think we can gain on that calf. The problem is that calf quit growing because that was all the lysine that it had to work with. So we look at that diet, we're going to pull back and say, okay, in this particular case, we'd go in and probably replace distiller's grains in that diet or some of the distiller's grains. We're going to add then a protein, and typically it's going to be a blend of proteins, but it gets those amino acids to where we want them to be. Because what we want is, we want that EE ratio to be 1.0, and we want the most limiting amino acid to be right there around 100%. All right, so in my view, there's 3 things, overarching things, that I think about in terms of how am I going to get this calf to grow like I want this calf to grow. First thing is, I've got to get that calf started right. I've got to get it on feed. I've got to keep it healthy or get it healthy. And so a lot of that is going to be, what's important there, I think, is some of the vaccinations, deworming, and all of that I'm going to do to that calf. Also in diet formulation, and we'll talk about that a bit more. Second thing is how I manage and cost of gain of that calf while it's on feed. So what can I do typically to maximize feed efficiency in that calf? And then third thing is, what can I do to promote heavy carcass weights and prime quality grades? I mean, there are several premiums I can get in that, but not a lot makes difference. There's not a lot that makes a difference to me other than hot carcass weight and how many of those calves I can push to prime. I think Gary maybe we were talking earlier this morning, but right now at National, we sent 2 loads of calves 2 weeks ago. There's a $50 premium on prime. So if I can push carcass weight and prime quality grade, I want to do that. Now, I want to spend a couple minutes getting started and how we get these calves started on feed. So I got to thinking about the best example I could think of was my first day in high school. So I went to grade school. There were 72 kids. There was 12 kids in my 8th grade class. And I went from that to a high school that had a whopping 430, I think, kids in it, something like that. I'd never seen anything like this before, right? So I thought about what I'd go through that first day. So the only water fountain I saw was by the principal's office. And I remember the first day of school, there was a buddy of mine named Bobby that had a cold, so his nose was running, and he drank right in front of me at that water fountain. Lunch wasn't like Mom's cooking, and my mom could flat cook. I couldn't get a snack when I wanted it. I mean, I had to stay in the classroom. I never understood that kind of lack of freedom before. Well, I just missed the first, and the only water fountain I saw was by the principal's office. And I don't know what you guys were like. If I was a freshman, well, the whole career in high school, I never wanted to go to the principal's office. I had to dress out, and this was probably the most stressful one. I had to dress out for PE at the same time that the seniors were dressing out for PE. And I think about when I look at some of these little calves trying to get to the bunk, and there's a big calf there knocking that calf back away from the bunk. I remember what it was like the first day I dressed out for PE. The heat went out at lunch, and I sat there and I was cold the whole afternoon, and there was no place that I could be at anywhere in high school the first day that I didn't have to be cool, right? I thought about that. There's not much difference between that experience and what these calves have to go through, right? So we take them from somewhere that probably life was decent, and we commingle them, and they have to drink from the same water fountain, and everything's new to them. Get water into the calf, and then what a lot of people say that feed cattle say, but not too much. But the point is drinker space and refill rate on that. And it's been interesting. Smaller calves, do they know what a drinker looks like? Simple stuff, but it's important. Get feed into the calf. I think that's important. We're going to talk about some diets and stuff in a second. But there's tricks we know there. One is that we know if we bump the trace mineral requirement about 2-fold because intake in those calves are down. If we do that, we got a lot better chance of getting copper, zinc, some of the trace minerals in that calf. Those trace minerals are important for the immune response of that calf. So if that calf came where it didn't have that, if it came from a farm or a ranch where its mother didn't have access to trace mineral or free mineral salt, that calf's already behind the 8 ball. So how do we get it ready to fend off? Electrolytes restored will bump the potassium and the chloride in the diet to try to get to a point where we can restore that. So we have a little saying, I don't know if you guys use this, but we have a little saying where I'm from, that you take a calf and you get him weaned and you move him and you put him into an auction barn and he goes through all that he could defecate through a screen door, right? So there's a lot of electrolytes that are going out from that solute balance and stuff in there. Parasite load, we're worried about that, getting that gut healthy. Begin setting the bugs up in the rumen. So we're going to talk about 2 things there. Either a moderate starch diet, you don't want to overcook them, or how we can introduce feed to those calves. My favorite is we start them out at like 1.25, 1.5% of body weight, and then we bump them a pound per head every 3rd day, but we stick to that. We don't overdo what that rumen can do. Respond to vaccine. I don't know if the vets in our group would agree with this, but I think I could talk to Dr. Dudley, and Dr. Dudley would say that nutrition has a lot to do with how the immune system's going to respond. Intake drive is ready to go. As soon as that calf gets acclimated to its surroundings, easy for that young calf to want to reach the 3% of body weight if we give that calf the kind of diet it can do it. And the other thing I like to hold on to is whatever I can do, or whatever I can achieve in that calf, that first 45 days, that calf never gives that up. We've had experiments where we had calves that didn't start well, and boy, they take off then. But if that calf that took off first, if there's 50 pounds difference in that, there's never a point that that calf gives that up. That calf's always behind that. All right, first 45 days on feed. So we'll go a little faster with some of these. Approach 1, moderate starch diet, corn and hay, co-products. We like to balance amino acids to prevent overconsumption of the diet. We talked about that a bit. Then I talked about the potassium and trace minerals. It is one place where I will use or can be talked into using a mannoligosaccharide or beta-glucan. You would know this in products as yeast. What's important to me is not just yeast, but how much of this moss and beta-glucans it brings with it, because they're important from the standpoint of immune response. And then Dacox. If you have calves coming in that you think has exposed or evidence of coccidiosis, I'm a big fan of hitting them with Dacox. And then approach 2, and that's kind of my favorite, is I start that calf at 1.2, 1.5% of its body weight. I put that in front of the bunk, I have plenty of bunk space, and the calf can eat that. And then I'll bump it every third pound, a pound per head per day, or a half a pound per head per day, depending on the size of the calf, but only every third day, and I stick with that. And I don't do it more aggressively, and the reason is I want to protect that rumen from overloading it on starch. And of course, some of the same specs as above on the potassium, trace minerals, and what have you. So is diet formulation important? 2 diets I've got here. The first diet is 79% corn. It's got amino acid balance, so we put the protein supplement with it that would balance amino acids. Then we have a 66% corn, 20% distillers diet. Initial body weights, 31-day body weights. We're looking just for the period in this calf that they're getting started on feed. Concentrate. We balance that 79% corn and amino acid diet, where it gave them enough energy with amino acids that our projection was it would support the same rate of gain as what the 66% corn, 20% distillers grains diet did. The idea of what we're doing here is we brought the intake down. This corn amino acid diet would be a little more expensive. We brought the intakes down to match performance, and the idea to save some money on that. And then disappearance, we put wheat silage bales in for the calves, and that's how much disappearance we measured at about 60% dry matter on that wheat baleage. Now, diet cost. The corn amino acid was about $6 a ton more than what the corn distillers grains diet comes in at $3.26, $3.20. Diet cost per head per day, $1.09 and $1.49. Wheat baleage disappearance was the same. I put that in at $120 per ton. And everybody's thinking, what right now? Monty, I'll buy all the wheat baleage you got for $120 a ton, right? But that's what we valued it at. Daily cost then, $1.57 to $1.97. In the last 2 columns, I flipped those numbers just to show you that I was human. But I flipped those 2 numbers. Average daily, the last column we flipped. No, I'm on the wrong slide deck. These numbers are right. What I want to point out there is we had 4.03 pounds a day on the corn amino acids. So those calves didn't gain quite as much as what the corn distillers grains did. But we looked at cost of gain. We had 39 cents for the balanced diet, 44 cents for the corn distillers grains diet, and we only lost about 2 cents there if we ran the corn amino acid calves out to the equal weight of what the corn distillers grains were. So the advertisement with this work is, or this research that we did was, amino acid balance has an impact in a short period of time, and the next couple of slides I want to show is over the wider feeding time. So a couple of commercial feedlot comparisons. This is one study we did on a feedlot in Missouri. Had a couple of pens of calves, beginning weight, the way they had the pens broke out, the control cattle start out a bit heavier. Finish weight, they were heavier by the same difference they had at the beginning. Average daily gain, 3.45, 3.57. Really not much difference there. And what we find on calves this size is they have found a way to overconsume to get to the level of growth or their average daily gain rate that they can do genetically. Dry matter intake, 22.8 pounds on our control, and we balanced the amino acids, 20.3 pounds. So we know this happens on young calves. Advertisement, it makes a difference for heavier weight calves too. The big difference in feed to gain, 6.6 versus 5.7. So we were close to gaining a whole pound of feed less per pound of gain than on the control diet. All right, the last last example I want to show, and then I want to open it up for questions and places that I have missed some information at. This is the work that actually a company, Boveda, we're linked up with now on FBN, and I was part of Boveda. We did this study at a commercial research facility. There were 800 heifers on each treatment, and they were broken into pens of 80 heifers, I think, if I remember correctly. And so this was their data analysis and what they did. And a couple things that I want to point out on this. So you can see start weights, they were pretty close. You can see end weights, little advantage there for the amino acid. 4% shrunk average daily gain, and they also looked at a hot carcass weight adjusted average daily gain. And when we balanced their diets, this was a commercial diet that the feedlot was feeding, we balanced that diet for amino acids, we were able to bump average daily gain a bit. Dry matter intake there didn't have any difference in that. The calves were just able to grow a bit more. And then when you look at feed cost of gain, gained about a penny per pound in terms of efficiency on those calves. The other thing we'd point out, these calves started late, and the yard that the facility did this said they had some smaller frame heifers than what they typically grow. We're also interested, though, and a big question we've had from producers is, okay, so we balance these amino acids, we do the diet like this, but wait a minute, how much are you going to wreck our carcass quality grades and carcass value of the animals? And that was what this study did, and a fairly large number of calves looked at. Hot carcass weight, we got a bit of a bump in when we balanced the diets for amino acids. The things that typically I've seen when we've done this is, and look at ribeye area on this slide, went from 14.4 to 14.9. And so typically what I've seen is we'll get about a ½ inch bump in ribeye area. Where's that important? If you are sending a group of calves out and they've got a yield grade of 3.8, that ribeye area will maybe help us bring that yield grade back to 3.4 or something like that. That doesn't make any difference to you. If you're sending out a group of calves that's 3.2 though, and we can bring that to 2.8, then you can get paid for that on most grids. So at least it moves that in the right direction. Didn't have any change per se in the in quality grade of the calf. And the main thing moving that was the hot carcass weight. We wound up with about a $14 advantage on the carcass when we balanced that diet for amino acids. Our advantage for the feed was about just less than $6 per head. So when the dust all settled, by changing the diet in that, I think we bumped cost per ton up about $12 or something like that per ton. But by making that change, we had around, I think around $20 advantage in these calves from a carcass value. Now what's interesting, I haven't read their no row. We sent these calves, or they sent these calves in loads separate to the kill plant. And there was one load of the treatment calves that went in, and just that one load in that lairage pen, I think there was four or five head that went down and came out dark cutters, and there were no rolls. If we do that, we pick up another penny on the carcass weight, and it puts the advantage up like $25, $27 bucks a head on that, all right? So kind of in summary then, what's the big thing different that we're doing? Energy. First thing we look at is energy, what the requirement of energy for that growing calf is for maintenance, and then growth. And I found effective energy to be a much more accurate description of the energy that calf needs than what NEG is, right? So we do that. Second thing is, we're not worried about just how much urea goes into the diet. We want to know how much nitrogen in terms of ammonia and how much peptide or amino acid nitrogen the bacteria need. We want to maximize microbial yield in that rumen that flows to the small intestine, and then that calf gets to digest all those amino acids. Cheapest source of protein we can make for that animal. Third thing we do then is we have a lot of interest in how do we balance those amino acids, because we cannot maximize efficiency of that calf if we don't have the amino acids balanced relative to energy. Very same approach that a poultry nutritionist or the swine nutritionist will take and how they set that diet up. Now, I want to, my hope is there is a lot of questions or challenges, and Ben Rowe has done this. Ben, you've got two turns doing this now, right? Two, and so Ben is, if nobody asks questions, Ben is going to be my guinea pig to talk about this a bit. So questions? Yep.
How many days before slaughter do you think this would actually make a difference? Do you need to keep this diet 90 days before, 180 days? Where's that sweet spot?
Yeah, so the question was, how many days before feed do you want to get them on this to see a difference in the carcass, right? And I can't see, you work with FBN?
No, sir.
Oh, I thought maybe you did, because like you're asking a feed company how long they need to sell, how long they need to be buying feed for, right? I thought maybe that was an FBN setup question. So if we look at a lot of feedlots, and the bigger they get, the more hesitant they are about making diet changes, right? So it's intriguing. They'll have 5 step-up diets they go to, then they have the diet they feed on. But they don't like multiple pens having 2 different diets they might get, right? It gets confusing. So the best response you're going to have is the lighter that calf is. And the reason is that's when that calf's putting on more lean growth and less fat growth, right? Lean growth needs amino acids, fat not so much. Now the interesting thing is, you look at, my view is, you look at a lot of the calves that we got now. I mean, those calves, you get them at 7 or 8, they've still got some lean growth in them, right? The genetics we pushed for and all that stuff. So that's an advertisement. My approach to it, I'd have about 2 step-up diets here. And that's the reason I like that limit feeding, and they go up to that. Have about 2 diets, I would feed them. And then 1,000, something like that, I might have a different supplement I would feed them, because why? Amino acid requirement from 1,000 to 15. I don't have to punch as much in that diet as I did earlier. That makes sense? So that's an advertisement. It's more than just saying that we want to sell you feed the whole time. There is a reason for that. The other thing is the advantages on the carcass. We've not done anything like we've just fed for 90 days prior to slaughter. So I really can't answer that question. But what we have done is, in work we've done, if I want these carcass advantages, that was something that I think growth occurred all along the way, right? In other words, what I set that calf up back here pays dividends out there when I kill that animal. That makes sense? I think that's how I want to get out of that question. Yeah. Other questions? Yep.
When you're talking about your limit feeding back about 4 or 5 slides, is that more like on a receiving ration, or receiving when you come in, then you figure so much pounds through a TMR in the bunk, and then they have free choice hay for a week, 10 days, 2 weeks? Can you kind of talk about that a little bit?
Yes, so excellent question. I didn't explain that well. So so we get calves in at home. Here's the way I like to do it. They come in, we make certain they got plenty of bunk space, so one calf's not knocking, and they get hay. That's all they get for day 1. Then we come back in, and day 2, we'll start and we'll give them, what we do is about 6 pounds of what I call the receiving supplement, right? And they will get that, and then day 3 is when we process those calves. Now, after day 3, then what I do is I'll have the hay in there, and I will start increasing the diet then to where we get them to ad lib intake, right? So yeah, that's very much how I like to begin them at. Now, I know Dylan does a lot of formulations. We've had some discussions. If it's a light calf, say 400-pound calf, Dylan says my comfort level is at 1.2, 1.25% of body weight. I'm like at 1.5% body weight. That's where I like to start at. Dylan's probably right. And then that I'll increase them a pound, but every third day. And I think here's one of the mistakes we make about reading bunks. And so I don't know if that's where your question's going, but that's like, I think, the biggest or the most important aspect of managing the calves is the bunk, right? And so I think the thing we need to remember about that is there's a lot of work that's been done that shows you feed a calf at 95% of ad lib, that calf's going to grow just as well as ad lib intake, but you save some feed. Now, really what that means is when they did that work, they had pens next to each other, same kind of calves. Let these calves eat whatever they wanted. The next day, they fed them 95% of what they saw disappearance to be, right? Really, I think what that means is that ad lib calf has lost that much out of backing out of the bunk and waste feed and all that kind of stuff, right? But I think we need to push those calves because they can't grow if they don't have groceries. But I think in keeping that rumen healthy, the thing for us to think about is if I'm a little bit behind on that calf, I'm in a lot better position from a health standpoint than if I'm over what that calf can go to that bunk and get. Does that make sense? I mean, that's more of an answer there than what you wanted. But yeah, start that calf out, let them be hungry. They come to the bunk. I can see who's sick, who's laying back, who isn't, and then increase their intake. But stick to that 3 day rule. Now go ahead. You had something else to say to that.
So you're limit feeding them, so to speak, the first 3 days.
The grain part, yeah.
Right through the TFR.
Yep. Yep.
And you feel that by limit feeding them, that slows up the rumen, so you get a better response then when they get through the barn on day 3 to get work. So you see a better immune response that way than if you let them eat and be full. They don't respond quite.
Yeah, so what I would say is we've had success with that. Now, what I'm always very interested in is when I meet somebody and here's the protocol they follow, and they've had great luck with that protocol. I mean, there's nothing like someone that's got experience that can do it, right? But the system that we use, that's the one I like. And what I like about it is different hands can be involved in that. And like, here's a pretty hard, fast rule to follow, and there's less ways to screw it up. Yeah. Now, Dr. Dudley, on the 3 days and vaccinate them. Anything you disagree with that, or?
No, I agree with that. We want to make sure cattle are hydrated. Yeah, if you didn't hear that, we want to make sure cattle are not dehydrated. That really impacts the immune response. So get them in, get them rested and rehydrated.
Yeah. Does that address your question then? Or do you think what else to add to it?
No, that's good.
Because actually, the people in the audience will learn more by probably more than by talking to each other than you will from me yapping, right? Yeah. Did you have a question behind there?
Large yearlings coming in, I'd say typical, but a Midwest feed diet, silage, yearlings, wet corn, and distillers. I think we've been overfeeding protein probably with distillers as of now. You balance amino acids by your balancer, you're mixing up the total diet a bunch, or how exactly, what are we doing to our ration in a finishing stage of the cattle?
Yeah, so like the diet that you described, general statements are never true, but I'm going to make a general statement here, right? Typically on those diets, we would look at that and say, okay, you're pretty heavy in corn protein going to that diet, right? And then you've added distillers to that. And so automatically, I know we're going to have a lysine problem, just almost guaranteed. So typically on those diets, what we would do is we'd pull the distillers grains back. What are you running now, 20 or how much distillers in there?
About 20.
Yeah, so if you're running 20, we might pull that back into the mid or the low teens, and we'd go in, and this is kind of an out-of-the-air guess, but maybe with a pound, pound and a half, whatever that be on a percentage, we'd go and we bring in whatever proteins, and usually it's a rumen stable protein we go grab because you got plenty of peptide nitrogen, you've got plenty of ammonia in that diet. So we want to go get whatever the cheapest source, least expensive source for amino acids that we need to match that diet. But in terms of what you would recognize is your distiller's percentage would come back some, and you'd have one other product to add into that mix. Say again? Yep. Yeah. Yeah, we're a feed company, so we'd love to put the minerals and vitamins and everything in there too. And I had another question right over there too, right?
Going back to your limit feed, which I agree with starting little calves, my question would be like when you're bunker eating and the weather is going up and down, I mean, you're looking at a late afternoon bunker eat, especially if you're, where I probably come to fault is you see weather change and you're like, you bump up too soon and you have something off feed.
Yep, couldn't agree more, yeah.
So what do you see, like, let's say you go out there mid-afternoon and it's cleaned up, and you're like, uh-oh, are you?
Yeah, so what we do, I go back to my 95% rule, right? That I'd rather be a little bit behind them. Now the problem is, so I'm in Southern Illinois, so I don't have to contend with temperatures like here and further north has to, right? So that would make a little difference, but I still like that rule of I'm only going to do a pound every third day. What I'll do is we'll be pretty aggressive. I mean, I don't mind coming reading 2 pounds back on a bunk and dropping that. And usually that's, in our case, we're going along and it's, I don't know, it's been mid-40s high, and then we have a 60-degree day, right? And intake's just like, you don't need anything. I don't have any problem going back fairly aggressive on that. But still, bringing those calves back up, I still want to adhere to that 1 pound per head per day and go 3 days before I bump that again. And the reason, and actually Robbie Pritchard at South Dakota I kind of give him credit for putting that out there where we all know about that. But what I think that does is that just keeps us out of the weeds. And a lot of the people that we've worked with, what we're seeing is bloats, digestive problems. And we think we can track that back to what we're doing when we overload that rumen with starch in there. And even though we get that calf acclimated to starch, so the megaspherules deneize up and it's eating the lactic acid and all that stuff, a lot of times I think what those calves get into problems with is just all the normal volatile fatty acids that are produced in that rumen. And just creates so much of a pH shift. It's not lactic acid, that we've got taken care of the rumen, but it's all these acids that we put into that when that calf goes in and has a gluttonous eating day or whatever, right? So I still like bump them, get the feed out of the bump if there's a problem there, but then when I bring them back up, I like to still hang on to that same rule. And the reason is, if I know I'm going to catch up with them, I don't think I'll lose that much weight getting them there.
There's order. And that's on a dry matter per pound basis?
So, yes.
Okay.
Yep. I would do well if I adhered to my own eating patterns, what I made calves go to.
So kind of expanding on that a little bit. So at what point do you pull the loose hay out and go to just a TMR ration?
Yeah, so again, another general statement. So my experience is if you kept hay in that bunk, those calves are going to kind of sort out, or if you had a round bale or whatever in the pen with them. It's very interesting. Every group of calves I've worked with, once they plane out, and if all you're giving them is concentrate mix, no roughage in the diet, it seems like they all settle out around 1 to 2 pounds of forage intake per day. The rest they go to the bunk. So what we do is we just let them finally consume all the hay out. And then if they're like at 1.8% of body weight or something like that, rumen's protected enough. I'm not worried. They've got enough to be, feel full. They can eat more, but they can feel full and all that. So that's when I let the hay run out. Now, the thing that we do, which is probably sounds a bit odd, is, but we'll leave the corn whole, we add the supplement with it, we'll condition the diet. But when we get the amino acids right, we don't put any roughage in the diet. So it's just a corn supplement diet. And so what we do is we let that roughage run out. But I think if I interpret the question correctly, those calves get around 1.8% of body weight intake or something like that, probably even 1.6. They're protected from the standpoint that then you can, how you balanced your diet, you can just go straight to the diet then. And here's the reason I say that, and so you could challenge it or think through it differently. But at 1.6, 1.8% of body weight, they're getting enough feed that I'm not worried about them at least being below maintenance, right? And until that point, they've got hay to go there to get as we keep increasing the dry mix to them. That makes sense? Other questions? How are we doing on time?
Yeah, do you do any studies on the percentage of dry matter in the feed compared to the moisture content? Because, there's a point where you can have too much dry matter.
Yeah, so the question, make sure I understand that the question is, where's the sweet spot in terms of dry matter percent of a diet, right? The range is there, right? Yeah, so haven't done anything where we've gone down low. Some dairy diets I've worked with, the lowest we would have been on them would have been around 40, maybe 42%, 40%. And the cows seem to go good. So I have, in most beef diets, would be 50%, would be about as low as they would get with silage and then some of the dry stuff that comes in with it, right? The bigger thing is when you get to the dry diets, the biggest problem I have with the dry diet is how do I condition that diet, right? A little silage, baleage, something like that, man, I love the way that conditions the diet, right? So if it's all dry, we've used oil, I've used glycerin, and I've used molasses, or what we would know as liquid feeds, right? And I really like how glycerin and liquid feeds condition the diet. Because in that whole dry diet, and we'll talk about, we don't have a lot of it blown away when it goes into the bunk, right? And that's all the expensive stuff that's blown away. But what I like about that conditioning is, you get, seems like at 3 to 4%, of the liquid in there is kind of a sweet spot. But 8 o'clock in the morning, 5 o'clock in the evening, that diet looks a lot alike. We've been using oil. I don't like the job oil does. Soybean oil is what we've used. I don't like what it does to condition the diet like I do the molasses or the glycerin. But so I don't have data to answer your question, but what I see is I love to have something in there that's got some moisture to it, because just the condition of the diet. If I don't have that, then I like what those the liquids to do, and my favorite. When biodiesel first came out, you could find glycerin all over the place. You can't find glycerin anywhere now, or at least I can't. And so but the liquid molasses I think does a good job in diet conditioning.
Part of the reason I asked that. Good. Part of the reason I asked that question too is because we've been in some real severe drought, mm-hmm. and so we don't have a lot of moisture feeds. Right. And we're trying to find out how to mix all this stuff that we've never used before. Yep. I never seen so many bales in all my life go up that you could bale, period. Yeah. It's just utterly ridiculous. But that's what we have. We have to work with it. Yeah. So. There are lots we'll put water into the diet, right?
So you might see 3% of the diet being water. They'll add to it. So that's something they can do. It seems to me though, like if you look at, particularly if you're doing a one time a day feeding, I've always liked the way that the molasses more viscous, glycerin the same thing. I really like the way that just keeps that diet together. And it seems like maybe they like the molasses and glycerin. I don't know what the calf's thinking, but it just seems like it really keeps them from doing as much sorting in that in the bunk. I don't know if do you have CRP where you're from?
Yes.
Yeah. So where I'm from, we have a saying that when you have a drought, you take up number 2 CRP hay. Do you know what number 2 CRP hay is?
What's that?
It's hay you take off a CRP ground. It's guaranteed no cedar trees are more than 2 inches in diameter. That's CRP, number 2 CRP hay.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Or is it time? One last quick one. It has to be quick, Ben, so you're off the hook. Well, hey, thank you very much for coming, and I hope this is a beginning of a couple or 3 good days for discussion that you guys get to have. Thanks.